Hi, so thoughts of a lockdown graduate in nursing, and um, so to keep an entire history as short as possible, hopefully, thinking about nursing school, especially one that's an accelerated program, it's pretty tough. There are programs out there which are accelerated, which are meant to be tough because you're meant to finish a little bit earlier than normal. But really, I doubt that there are any nurses out there that will say that their educational experience was easy. And that goes for LVNs, LPNs, RNs, and this is regardless of if it's an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. The program I entered was an accelerated program for the bachelor's degree in nursing. But I came into nursing school having already had a bachelor's degree in science. So this was my second bachelor's I was trying to get. And to be honest, I didn't really want to pursue science in the first place. And I would have much rather preferred to pursue history and writing, for example, and maybe teach a class one day. Reasons for, why I did not really do that, that's another story. But nevertheless, I worked as hard as I could, and often as possible, I tried to truly invest really a genuine interest in the courses which in fact, more accurately, in which my parents and the federal government were, paying for. So now I don't want to make this reflection about financial aid, the economy, or any criticisms about, you know, the government or about, the social class system. Not that. That's another story too. But I was hoping to actually share some of the things which I've learned from my second bachelor's degree, and that's in nursing, and how even my experience in you know getting the education for science and for nursing, really helped me. How learning science first helped me in getting my bachelor's in nursing, for example. So, what does nursing school really expect of you? And partially, I'm saying these things, I guess, partly as a journal, but also if anyone happens to be listening, maybe something they can take from it. I'm not sure, but what it might expect from you, well, in my experience, in an accelerated program, which should take you, much less than 4 years, especially if you already have certain classes on your belt, prerequisites. Speaking of which, you will need certain prerequisites such as anatomy, writing, math, physiology, and speech classes. So it will depend on the school. It'll depend on your school on which classes are required before you apply. I'm pretty sure you might have already known that if you are someone who has applied or kind of thought about applying to a nursing school. But that kind of stuff is what you'd expect, and to be honest, it's the stuff you can find out from, yeah, any website or even getting in contact with their counseling office or things like that. But I'm going to be totally honest and just tell you that while I started out quite strong, finishing some basic courses which were meant to prepare you for the actual nursing courses, it was not until I reached that core level of nursing, the nursing core, which begins with, you know, being professional and also the fundamentals of nursing. That's when I realized how different things were going to be at that point. So I had managed to get my diploma in science, for example, about 3 years prior to starting nursing school, which was, I think, was a more forgiving program, while I was doing undergrad studies and also at a different school. If I failed a class, for example, or got a C minus or lower, I had the option to retake it and replace that grade, right? But I took organic chemistry 3 times actually, and on that third attempt, I finally, aced it. And this was again when I was getting my bachelor's in science. I developed a study habit which took a lot of work and a lot of hardship. I did well in high school, but I'm sure that many of you possibly, listening to this now already know that our study habits in high school, uh, even if you had a high GPA, for example, that study habit in high school is not quite a cookie cutter mold for studying, and that college will more than likely require some changes in how you study. So those changes are different for every person. But anyway, yes, college taught me that amidst a lot of distractions, a serious study habit has to adapt to the nature of the class and the methods of learning that worked best for me. But it was worth mentioning that in between my bachelor's in science and entering to nursing school, I actually I had to, I worked a lot, of course, and also took some classes on the side whenever I could to prepare to apply actually to pharmacy school. But due to some things which happened, you know, in my personal life, family life, I had to kind of pause those plans and really work more hours, at work to help with finances, for example. And these things, they just happen. Anyone could say, anyone can relate, I think, to things that happen in their family or in their personal lives that makes them have to just kind of change gears. And that's what happened to me. So many nursing schools in my state, though, they were heavily impacted, by the way. So it was kind of hard to get into them. So while I began to shift gears and move towards nursing instead of pharmacy, which to be honest was not to me a good idea anymore, pharmacy, because I had to first get accepted and then do 5 to even up to 7 years of schooling possibly, and that during that time, in while being in school, I wouldn't be sure how much I could work and really help support my family, for example. And and again, I live at home with my parents and other members of my extended family. So although rent, is not maybe was not a problem for me, there were still things I need to help with, and it was yes, part of that duty as well, being also in an Asian household. But I think this applies to any household. I was really taking part of that responsibility for the finances. But anyway, the best option was nursing, to keep it short, and in taking advantage of my background education and determining that it was a stable job, which almost always is in need. But all those and the details of that, it's still a whole other story, and one that might be a bit complicated to fit into this video. But my point in all this is that once I entered the core educational courses of nursing, my study habits, which I thought had been honed pretty well, had to once again, yeah, they had to change. So what are some things that I believe would really help a new nursing student, or maybe even someone who is starting off already in nursing school? What are some things which a person might need to know before they totally, you know, lose their sanity? Not, I'm joking, of course, but in a way, yes, there has to be a way that we can prepare ourselves before we take on something like nursing school. These were some of the questions, I asked myself since I experienced just about probably every possible emotion during my time at nursing school, which ended, thankfully, in March 2020, just as the COVID lockdowns began. Though that itself was pretty bittersweet given knowing what would come in the next few months to follow. And as everyone would know, things escalated, and that really changed up how classes were taken, how exams were administered, and really then that could change your study habit, and work situations. If you have families or if you have kids during the lockdown, all of these things were pretty much tossed around, and it was a real challenge for most people to cope with. It still is. But while I was in nursing school prior to that lockdown, prior to when I finished the program, what I experienced was that the professors, the instructors, they encouraged us to remember why we wanted to be a nurse, so that when times got rough, we would remember those reasons and endure as best as we could, really. But so if you're able to do that, with a clear mind, then to be honest, that's really all you need. And for sure, I can attest to that, amidst some 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. drives to a clinical site, which was maybe an hour or more away at times. It was really things like, my family, which helped me endure and overcome that entire day and other days and nights um, throughout that time, through my clinicals and my classes, thinking about pretty much it's not just me or yeah, it's not just yourself that would benefit, but ultimately it would be benefiting someone else. But hey, maybe your motivation is really about getting yourself up there, getting yourself to be really independent and financially independent. And if that works for you, then use that. You just have to remember what you're doing it for. And in my case, even though I did not have this passion to become a nurse, I knew that what would come out of it would be good, and so I tried to focus on that. So that's something I would recommend also. Um, but other than that, um, I can relate to people who maybe just have so much on their mind and really they have a load of anxiety for things which they don't even understand yet. And this is probably because, they, like I, most likely developed some kind of a general anxiety disorder or something. There are times where you just can't focus. You can't really think about why you're doing it or what will the benefits be because at that time you're just too anxious about an exam or a quiz score because of how important they are. So that's why it's good to talk about how you might cope during nursing school and also after nursing school. Studying every day sounds cliche, all right? But you have to find a way that works for you. Some of us might have a part-time or a full-time job, and on top of that, those things, some of us might, some of us might also have a family that we need to support, whether it be parents, grandparents, or spouses, and or kids also. There really can't be a go-to formula for studying and creating that habit. There really isn't. You have to go by your own situation. I had to leave, for example, I had to leave my job due to the increasing challenge of how the courses in the beginning terms of nursing corps and how much was at stake every quiz and exam that we took. In my program, you could only really rely on a few quizzes and exam scores. Let's say maybe 5 quizzes and a midterm and a final, for example. Those really were the only things that you could count on to determine what your final grade would be. There was no credit for assignments, although there were assignments due, which were mandatory and you would fail if you didn't complete them. But what counted towards you passing the class literally was only the quizzes or the exams. And some programs use ATI, which those exams, some of those may count, such as a practice proctored exam or an actual proctored exam. It depends on your program. But for my situation, that's how it was. And I think a lot of my anxiety came from thinking about, oh, if I don't do well on this quiz, I only have 4 more quizzes to do at least average on, or at least get a good grade. And so you would always, well, I always found myself calculating how much I had to do, how well I had to do on the next quiz, and the next quiz, and the next quiz to help ensure that I can pass or that, what my minimum grade I would need to get on my final exam just to pass the class. And I'm pretty sure a lot of nursing students can relate to that, but it could just be me. But also, study habits might vary by, your course load. What classes are you taking and how many? Some programs limit how many you can take, so that's another thing too. The topic of the course and also your clinical schedule can also affect, your study habit and how you're creating it. And of course, like we mentioned before, your own personal situation. In general, I tried to use planners, and it did help during some parts of my program in certain terms, which the terms that were the most busy in terms of clinicals and multiple classes and so many different things that were due on varying days, where if it wasn't turned in on time, it could be huge, it could be detrimental to you. So, whether it be a physical assignment that was to be turned in to your professor, or something you had to write and to upload it online, or or maybe an online class which required frequent forum postings and also papers to be submitted with research and citations and these things. So it's going to depend. What did I do when there were difficult concepts? Well, they really weren't kidding when they told us that knowing the anatomy and physiology, of the human body, it's very important because concepts felt the most difficult to me when I didn't understand how they worked on a physiological level. And I mean, not just the basic, like, oh, I know that, if they have hepatitis, it's the liver, there's inflammation and things like that. I know what that is. That itself is not really understanding the etiology or the physiology of what's going on with something like hepatitis. But if you zoom into it, you can understand how it can happen, and then what does happen when it happens, and then what will happen after that, meaning what are the other manifestations, what are the complications. That you could understand more if you actually did what you could to either read about it or watch a video. To be honest, memorization of interventions and manifestations can only get a person so far. It only got me so far. And I found that out as time passed by. It just wasn't enough to memorize and memorize. Although there was a lot of memorizing I had to do, and you will need to do. But for a lot of concepts, especially in med surg, and yeah, in pediatrics, and all of these things, um, and in fundamentals, I watched videos and I read the relevant sections of the textbook. And to be honest, when it comes to the textbook, honestly, I just skimmed through it and I literally highlighted parts of it. And I highlighted the parts that were the most memorable to me, something that I could stick in my mind because the textbooks can be pretty wordy. And for the 1,000 things that I could learn reading it, I'd be lucky if even one of those things will be really, to be honest, necessary for applying knowledge on the quiz or the exam. Because there's so many things you study in nursing, but not everything could possibly be asked on a quiz. So sometimes it's like playing a lottery. If I study all this, I wonder if the sections I know really well will come up on the quiz. And I think that's just a reality. But but you know what? Some people can study all of these things and remember them all remarkably well. And if you're one of those people, I'm jealous because I can't do that. So I would really have to focus on things that I for sure consistently would get wrong. And it sounds ridiculous, but maybe, yeah, maybe other nursing students or graduates might agree with me. It could again just be me. So certain YouTube channels and websites were pretty consistent in helping me in my classes, depending again on the topic and really how in depth I really needed to get into that topic in order for me to retain at least some of it and apply the understanding to a random question. Um, and that kind of question being an NCLEX type of question, meaning identifying what the manifestations are, prioritizing patients, and delegating. And when it comes again, though, to identifying manifestations, NCLEX won't always ask you what they are. It will figure out some other creative way to test if you know the manifestations. And usually that means it would be in a select all that apply or a SATA question. So keeping that in mind too, and I could talk about NCLEX prep, in another video too. On a side note, on a side note, I'm a very average student. Even if a friend might tell me that they think that I am, you know, quote unquote smart, that's not true. It's probably just because while I'm in school, I'm usually focused and really quiet when I'm reading, maybe, and that could be interpreted as someone maybe who's quote unquote smart. But actually, I have a hard time studying. I have a hard time really trying to pass classes, and that's why I have to focus. Because maybe some people can do well without focusing and very intensely, and wow, that's a talent. That's a gift that I think people just have. But for me, it takes me usually. If someone takes an hour to learn something, it could take me an hour and a half or 2 hours, or what, even maybe a whole day, who knows, to figure out a way for me to really understand it in my own way. So, I mean, that's just a side note again, because another time I'll probably talk about how I prepared for exams, or no, how I prepared for the NCLEX or even the ATI green light program, getting that green light. So, but anyway, I really believe that you have to find your own pattern, your own pattern of which resources that you use based on your time and how long you're able to actually focus. I personally probably can focus for up to a maximum of 3 hours. If it's a conceptual based studying. So if I'm getting into the study or the book, whatever it is, getting to know the physiology or the etiology of that topic, I would probably last a maximum of 3 hours until I would start to feel like uh, maybe tired, or that I wanted to do something else, or that I just wasn't retaining. I just wasn't getting that. Sometimes what I call it is like being on a roll. I feel like, the first hour, the second hour, third hour, I'm on a roll. Like things that I'm reading, I understand it, and I can teach it back to myself, and that's what I consider being on a roll. But I could only usually maintain that for up to about 3 hours. Um, I might last about 4 hours if it was mostly doing practice questions mixed with some reading whenever I got a few questions wrong on the same topic. But on average, I would say about 3 hours. And for me, I tend to be able to focus a lot more those 3 hours if I was on campus. Sometimes if I was at home, but I had to be by myself. Um, Probably locked up in a room somewhere to really focus like that. Some people have different amounts of focus time that they have. Some people can only focus for a whole hour. And that's again the point. If you can figure out what that pattern and what that habit is for you, then you will be set, because you can already set it up throughout the whole week how you're going to study. It sounds obvious and it sounds like it's common sense, but that's what I thought too when I was good in nursing school. And we're just so caught up and busy sometimes, though, that we don't want to stick to something that we organized. Um, and things can be very complicated because things happen in life, your personal life, things happen at school. So you have to figure that out for yourself. That's what I found out. But in another video, I might talk about some of the things which always, always seem to come up on quizzes and exams, whether it be in class or, whether it be also ATI. In each of the premier courses, of the nursing core level of nursing school. But the fundamentals are very important. And to be transparent here, I actually failed the first time I took fundamentals. And as another side note, remember that different nursing schools have different requirements of what passing means. Usually, um, to fail a course in nursing school usually means that your grade in the class is a C or a C minus. I mean, you cannot get below a C or below a C minus, for example, depending on your course. So when I was an undergrad and studying biological science, actually, I believe a D plus was considered passing, so that was okay. And again, you can retake it more than once, more than twice to replace that grade. But in my program for nursing, taking a course a second time, it actually really helped me. Though, keep in mind, for my program, you could only really fail a total of 2 classes in the entire program before you are kicked out of the program. And pretty much that means you're back to the back of the line, because by that point a lot of people are probably trying to get into your program or to your school. So it was it was scary. Um, but if it was not like that, I don't know if I would be pushed as hard. It's debatable. But suffice it to say, the whole ordeal it stressed me out, and probably what triggered a dormant anxiety disorder. I swear. I I haven't been diagnosed with that, but I think anyone that can remember the stress from school can probably recall being anxious all the time. If not, then you are probably a very good student. Very good. But preparing for and taking on the NCLEX. Now talking about that, that's a whole other story, and something I experienced just recently as of sharing this video. I did pass it in July. Uh, I'm recording this on the 23rd. By this point, I did find out last night I did pass, and I passed on the first attempt with 60 questions. And I found out that I found out that I passed actually through the Breeze website. I didn't get to search the quick results yet. It's still not available. I just saw my license on the Breeze website. And that was about 30 hours after I completed the exam. But yeah, I'll probably talk about NCLEX prep in another video and my experience with that. The takeaway, I think, is that you need to find out a way to be able to study every day, even if it means taking a few note cards to work, or when you're waiting to pick up your kids, if you have kids. I'm not a parent, so I can't fully relate to those struggles, but I know classmates who were parents. I really think they were always on top of everything. I was amazed and still am amazed how much they could do, even though I would think that, they've got to be super busy with their kids and family. I mean, if you absolutely have to work, then yeah, I would say bring your notebook and only study one concept or 2 concepts at work during break. The concepts which you're the least confident in. I did that while I was working, before I stopped. But if you are like me eventually, and if you're able to take a break from work or leave work entirely, and you live with your parents, like me, then there's not so many excuses to not study, right? If we are honest with ourselves. Yeah, I'm pretty active in community programs, but I had to balance those as well so I could find a study habit that worked for me. And again, it changed every term depending on the subject, to be honest. Now, I don't think I would plainly recommend this, but for me, in between studying at my desk, I'd watch a show, like on YouTube, or even not a whole episode, by the way, just part of it. um, or even I would have like a low maintenance kind of game in the background on my PC that I could just retreat to and pause in between while I'm studying, as some kind of treating the show and that as an incentive to reading thick blocks of text. Nothing like a bit of Cosby Show or Rimworld couldn't fix, or whatever game or show that you like. But just not all the time. That's what I would say. So I guess just in the end, I hope some of this would have been helpful. Maybe it was just more helpful for me to just express it for myself. I mean, maybe it helped me since I am wrapping up now and finally certified. Maybe a way for me to, I don't know, find some kind of closure or something. But maybe if you're listening to this, you might find it useful. I did want to make a video, or I guess it's more of a podcast or something, about NCLEX prep, or I wanted to kind of talk about each class and what I experienced in each one. Because to be honest, when I was in nursing school, which was very recent, I always wondered what other people felt like, how it was for them studying. So maybe I'll talk about those things about each class and what are the things that I felt were the most important to always make sure to cover, in case, it might feel like you're unable to study everything. What are some things you might definitely review? And what are some tips in understanding them, for me? And again, I'm a type of learner. It takes me a while to understand something. But once I can finally understand it after all that time, usually I could apply it pretty well. And that's the important part. So maybe if you're someone like that, where you don't get things right away, maybe it'll help you. And we'll see. But otherwise, thank you for listening. This has pretty much just been a journal, or thoughts of a lockdown graduate, and now a lockdown nurse. And see you next time.